Next, we have on our agenda UAV evolution to prescription farming. I am pleased to have Rich Price join us and share the information about the work that he has done with Dr. Bruno Basso. Rich will take the work that he's been funded for years by the Michigan Wheat Program and share with you how it all comes together to get the most out of your farm and leverage the management with the layout of your fields. I will turn it over to Rich. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So have the guy who's just going to show a bunch of maps go after lunch. I know what's going to happen at the end of this talk, right? So yeah, my name is Rich. I work in two kind of positions. I work for MSU Extension, but I also have a foot in Bruno Basso's lab, which is known kind of as the drone guy, or if anybody's gone to a football game, his face is on the side of the stadium. And so the drone brings us a lot of attention. And so I have cards, but I also, if anybody has a cell phone with a smartphone with a camera, you can take a picture of that QR code and get a link to my website so that you can contact me if you have any questions. But I will jump right into it. Okay, so some of the work funded by the Wheat Board for our group from the past 10 years or so has kind of focused on this idea of what we call UAVs or drones. And nowadays, these things are pretty common, right? I don't want to single anybody out, but I would ask, raise your hand if you haven't seen a drone, and then I would pick on you because these things are out there every single day. And when we started this work, really the drone aspect was purely from remote sensing. So we wanted to put the drone up in the air, take some cool photos, use some fancy sensors, and try to get an understanding of how the crop is going through time and space, which is a really fancy way to say variability. So on the left is an example of what that drone looks like, stationary, and on the right, you're seeing this video or this GIF move through, showing the same video over and over again of really what that comes to from fruition, right? So we are taking that data, bringing it to the lab, doing some fancy analysis and some high computer, high process work, and it's driving a decision. And this is in corn, but in this example here, the remote sensing and all the other data layers we have told the farmer that said, hey, there's a spot in your field where you could benefit from a late season application in fertilizer or fungicide, but you don't need to spray the whole field because our data now says the whole field would be a waste of time. So we targeted the drone to go out to a really specific spot because if he sprayed it and he wasted that product, you know what happens with dollars and cents. So I gave a presentation a year ago, and it really kind of drove this message home that I think is more applicable to the farmers nowadays, the word data. Data can mean so much. You can be afraid of losing your data, right? Somebody's after your data, somebody's taking your data, somebody's harvesting your data. But I want to stick to the farm, okay? What are the types of data that we have in our farm, right? So if you look at my, right here, the first one that I can think of is soil data. So who pokes holes in their crop and gets a sample that they send to the lab, and you get an analysis back, right? So you're looking at your organic matter, you're looking at P, K, CEC, lime. So that's a type of data. The second part, weather data. Now, my dad has this fancy weather station that he has. He loves to call me and tell me how cold it is in certain times, and that's cool, but there's different ways of looking that up. And then management data. So, okay, Dennis just showed an example of some of the farmers fill out the form to tell you how much nitrogen they're putting on, when they plant it, and all that's really important. And then the last one, and I'm going to start there, is this idea of yield data. So really, all of these things in this slide here, we have all these different things we can think about. Tillage and manure, and it's crazy, right? You try to make sense of this, and I deliberately made it confusing because that's really what it's like. It's really confusing to think about all these kinds of data, and how do they relate? In essence, the end goal of a wheat grower is to grow a good yielding crop, right? Yield is king. I would argue that some of these factors have nothing to do with your yield. And Roger mentioned that at the beginning of his talk about how much the farmer can control. So it's my job at Michigan State University Extension to kind of help dive into that data and say, okay, what is important and what can we do with it? And I'm going to start with yield. So in my group, one of the things that we focus on is taking your past production and using that to delineate management zones. Because the best predictor of where you will have your future yields is from your past yields. So this map here really takes you the past yield data from this particular farmer who's farming this oddly shaped field. And it says, okay, let's do a statistical analysis and let's delineate zones where he has high productivity, those are the blue zones, where he has an average productivity, which are the green zones, and where he has low productivity. And anyone can guess why he has low productivity along this field the field edges? Any guess? Starts with 4 letters. Bingo, right? Deer is one of them, but there's a multitude of factors, and every farm is unique. It could be compaction, it could be shading, it could be, more deer. There's a lot of other factors in that, but now what I'm going to mention is that what we're doing is we're visualizing what I would call spatial variability. So how the field changes from one spot in the field to the next, okay? The second factor of what we look at is now we're looking at the field and we don't care what the crop is. We don't care whether it was corn, whether it was wheat, whether it was soy, whether it was canola. When we do this analysis, the one thing we're looking at is, do those areas of high always stay high, regardless of the crop? Do those stay low, regardless of the crop? So who has SMS? SMS does this feature in their software, and it's called a yield normalization map. But what SMS doesn't do great is dealing with what we call temporal variations. And I'll refer to those as unstable. So you can have a spot that's really, really good, really, really high, but then in 1 year, maybe it's the lowest part of the yield, and that's a lot of driven by position of the landscape. So these hilltops or slopes, or these low areas of the field with pond with water, a low area that ponds with water in a dry year, it's some of your best yield in the field. But in a wet year, it's some of the lowest yield in the field. So all about our yield data, we come to basically quantify, and we have this one map that rules them all. It's not our soil map. It's not our sampling. It's not Sergo. It's not some drone image that we have. It's your yield data telling you what you should expect on your yields. And so one of the things that we do in the lab is anybody can scan my QR code, send me an email, say, Rich, I have some data. I'd like this map. We will do it for free. We will not, and if I present your data, I won't tell you who it came from and where it came from, but we will give you that data in a shapefile and a raster, and you can put it in any software application you want to use. So one of the things that Roger mentioned yesterday at his seminar, which I thought was pretty interesting, is he said, how much of the variability, what can the farmer control, right? So it's around 40% of what the farmer can actually have a control on each year. So where does the other part of that, where does the third of that variability lie? He couldn't quantify it. And then the other part of the variability comes into the year, right? So the year to year. So Basso's group and a postdoc he has did that per state and per crop. And I highlighted just the wheat data in this, that we basically came down and said, out of, I think the yield data goes back to 2008. In this analysis, the year ended up dictating a range of about 75 bushels per acre can vary in the yield in that same space. And then in one field across the whole space can vary about 44 bushels. So that's telling you that what's more important in you getting the best yield that you can, is it where you plant the crop, or is it what Mother Nature's going to bring? Mother Nature drives that variability, and we cannot control that. Okay, so I described variability. I talked about yield, which is essentially the outcome of our work. We're getting paid from yield, right? That's what we're selling at the end of the season. So what are some other types of data that we have, and what do they interpret and what do they mean? And I want to just emphasize that and kind of discuss their value, okay? So the same field that I showed before where I had the yield data, we analyzed those zones. We had plenty of farmers, and the one who gave me this data to begin with said, you know what? I don't need your analysis, Rich. I poke my own holes. I go out on 2.5 acres, I poke a hole, I send it to the lab, and I do this every 3 years because he sticks in a 3-year rotation. Great. Do the spatial patterns, does the way that data look match what you would expect to get your yield? And not to keep referencing Roger, but Roger did mention that in some of the yen analysis, they looked at organic matter. And we think organic matter, man, that's providing all the nutrition to our field. We need to build our organic matter. Does organic matter drive the yields that we see? Not in this field. It might in some fields if you have a very simple field that, is pretty straightforward. But when we get into these fields, which is, I don't know why, this part of the field was never trimmed for those trees and farmed, but this is the shape, and everybody can think of a field where they have that has a kind of a weird shape to it. There's a lot of things that go in through and drive, the process of how we can understand how to manage that. So soil is one way, and I can show the map from the same field of CEC, of his pH, of his P, of his K, and I won't do that, but the spatial pattern, where the blues are, dark blues, and where the light blues are in different spots, okay? So that's kind of how we deal with soil data. Weather data, there's a picture of my dad's weather station that he has right outside the farm. EnviroWeather, MSU Extension, and Jeff Andreessen's group has a great resource. You can go online, check I think there's a station here. Check and see what the soil temperatures are. Really great. Does it help you, 15 miles away, 20 miles away? It can. It cannot. But is this usable data that you can take and make a decision on? Sometimes it's hard to do that with these weather data. But we use them. So finally, what are some things we can't control? So it's management. When can we go out and do it? When can I put my seeding in? Dennis said on one of the wheat growers planted pretty late, but he achieved a really, really good yield. And so some of those factors, like I said, it's that year-to-year variability that really changes from what impacts what we're going to see at the end of the year. So what I'm showing here in this GIF is a farmer who shared with us a ton of yield data, and I put all of his maps on the field, and I'm just creating a screenshot of my computer zooming into those fields. So saying that anybody in this room that has these kind of data, these tools exist that are available to visualize it. And then you can take this to the field. If you know where your variability is, it can help you plan for things in the future. Things like cultivar selection, which is really important. Where do we put those cultivars? If we know that we're going to have certain spots of the field that may respond better to that kind of management, then we can have those decisions about which cultivar goes there. Fertility and tillage systems, seeding rates. I'll show a slide about some seeding rates. But what we do in the fall, let's remember that in Michigan, if we plant them in the fall, 90 to 95% of the growing season hasn't even occurred yet, right? If we make decisions to vary things in the spring, we've got a ton of the growing season that hasn't occurred yet. So let me point out that paper that Dennis was on that really looked at, okay, what were the seeding rates? They tested different seeding rates throughout and looked at their potential yield at different planting dates. So if they went low seeding rates pretty early on in the growing season and then progressed forward, it didn't hurt yield potential. All with, say, a mid-September planting rate. But the later they got with the lower seeding rates, the lower they realized that their relative potential would. Unless we consider that one yen grower, right? That would probably be the spatial variability of it. I didn't realize you were going to do that, Dennis, because it totally threw my slide off. No worries. Another thing that we talk about is the different kind of management we put on, right? Who puts on a PGR? Who puts on fungicides? Marty was here to talk about the benefits of applying fungicides, and they put a paper together that really looked, actually Kurt's paper really looked at putting these fungicides on to look at lodging, but in cases when the variety was not susceptible to lodging wasn't present, and Roger can confirm, there's no data to suggest that just putting a PGR in will raise your yield, right? That's published. Fungicide applications. In some of Marty's work, we put on a fungicide, we want to get ahead of it because we're not sure of what is going to be a bad year. But fungicide applications do boost yield, and prevent losses when there is high disease pressure. But getting to that point of understanding of what those years are going to show, like again, comes back to that idea of understanding temporal variability. And finally, the one that I'm going to speak tomorrow about to the yen group has to deal with using remote sensing, using this idea of historical yield to now look at applying variable rate nitrogen in the field in the spring green up procedures. So this map is an example of a as-applied map from the applicator, and I've got my field with different colors. So in the yellow was the high rate, in the red was the mid rate, and in the blue was the low rate. So this is the as-applied of the farmer applied a variable rate nitrogen that we sent the prescription for, and this is what it looks like when it gets put on. So one of the things to understand, can these options work for us in the farm scale? I want to reiterate a webinar that was on the Wheat Wisdom that was hosted by John Laporte from MSU Extension earlier this year. And one of John's tasks is getting out there and putting together these tools, these tables, these Excel files, where they have some categories, and then you can put in what these input costs are. Because again, don't raise your hand, but if I asked, how many people know their cost of production on their wheat? What does it take you to put your seed down, to put your fertilizer, your land cost, your each individual application you make, your harvest? I think he puts on freight and trucking as a category in here. All of these are good tools to use to give an estimation of what it costs to produce your wheat. And there are these same tools for the other grain crops as well. Because I would argue that even though we're here on behalf of Michigan wheat, the other crops that you grow, and this area being very diverse, sugar beets are an important crop in our rotation, corn, soybeans. Those are other important crops. It's a good idea to have an understanding of what those costs of production is, because the conversation I had earlier today was how the prices we sell our crops haven't necessarily changed in about 30 years. So if we want to remain profitable and continue to do what we do, it's controlling these input costs, okay? Because what I will get to, and I will finish pretty quick and take any time for questions, is the next thing that we're working on with MSU, with the precision and digital ag space, is we want to turn these yield maps that we get. We took these yield maps and we're understanding the variability. I'm not going to get into how that works. But then if we can take these individual yield maps and come back to the farmer and say, if you know what your cost of production is on a per acre basis, if you know an idea of your relative grain prices on a per acre basis, your yield map is even gives us a higher revolution than a single acre. Each one of these different colors, these different zones, is a pixel. A pixel is a fancy word for just a little spot on the screen. Each one of those pixels is a 10 by 10 foot area. So I can tell you with high resolution that in these corners of the field, that profit, it's the yield turned into dollars and cents, that profit was over $200 loss per acre. Wasn't the size of an acre. Actually, if we added up all the areas on this field, and this is wheat, added up all the spots in this field that were less than zero, negative profit, losing money, 6.3 acres of the field lost money. If we add up all the areas of the field that did make money, 12.9. Hey, we have more than we lost. We're able to farm another day, right? In corn, who grows corn? Yep, okay. We know, right? Corn at this point in time, it just costs too much to grow. You're not getting the return on investment. These maps from the hundreds of farmers that share with me, the corn maps look eerily similar. Loss acreage, 22.1. Making money, 16. So more than half the field we're losing money. And we could spend the next hour going through why these parts of the field do have that problem, right? I see a lot of wooded area around this cornfield. I see a lot of pink colors in areas where it is heavily wooded. What's that 4-letter word again? There you go. That's part of it, right? But now kind of using the data you have, because one map that you collect from yield, from soil, is one snapshot in time. We've had these monitors on combines since the late 90s. We've been poking holes for soil sampling since probably then or even a little bit after. Now, we can take that data and look at these long-term trends to kind of get a better understanding and manage this variability on a much smaller scale. So in conclusion, my role within Michigan State in partnership with Basso's lab can do these things for you. You have the data. I do not get paid from a company to take it and sell it and harvest it and do whatever the case may be. I can take these things for you. But we didn't think that was good enough. So we got funding through, thanks to Tim and the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, through the Climate Resiliency Project, to build another website, another tool, another thing that'll probably get ignored. But it'll be my job to kind of champion this, to say, this will be something that'll be in the works where these things become more available. So it won't be, hey, Rich, give me your email address to send data back and forth. This will be available where we can have some of these layers more existent that'll be on the internet for people to use. And with that, I'll just acknowledge Bruno's got a big team. These are all the people in his lab. These are the people that are doing these analysis. It takes a big team with a lot of degrees, high computing power to do this. And so this is why my services are offered to you for free. And then I think I have time for a few questions. Has anyone seen the yield to profit stuff? Because I am keen to John Deere Operations Center, Climate Field View. It used to be called Encirca, but now it's called something else. My Farms. I'm on every single one of those platforms. I've never once seen any one of those platforms do this. John Deere partners with another company, but they want to charge you how much an acre to do it. Is this map valuable, or is this a waste of time?
How many years of yield data would you like to make these stability maps for growers?
Right, so how many years of data does it take to do a stability analysis? Good question. Like I said, in 1 year of data, I've got one time point in the whole system of that. Maybe that was corn, maybe that was soybeans, maybe that was a really, really bad year like a 2012 in some Michigan, which was under severe drought. That's the bottom. At minimum, we like 3 points, because 3 points does not make a straight line. 2 points makes a straight line. 3 points, we can kind of get a little bit of inflection in there. The more years, the better, I would say. In John Deere, like again, not to pick on John Deere, I actually think it's my favorite of all the platforms. John Deere will do a stability analysis for you, but it will not let you pick more than one species of crop. You can do a stability analysis for only corn, and then you can do the same field and do a stability analysis for only wheat, for only soybeans. And when you do that analysis, your zones look different. And our analysis says, from the history of your crop, being crop agnostic as we call it, your zones do not change. George.
Scary part of this map is that you giving it back to us, maybe we decide we don't want to farm half of that.
That is another talk for another day. What if we don't want to farm at half of that? What would we do? Well, if you didn't want to farm something 20 years ago, what did you do? You put it into CRP, right? The government paid you not to farm it, but it was the whole field, right? Conservation Reserve Program was a whole field, and how long was it, 15 years, the contract? So some of this work that Bruno got was funded through NRCS, and the goal was to tell NRCS, stop taking out whole fields from production. The whole field isn't the problem. It's just parts of the field, right? And with the drones, with the high precision yield monitor data, with all the different tools we have, we can now focus kind of, I hate to use the word resolution, but we can see things on a much smaller scale now, right? We're not looking at our soil maps and saying, yeah, I've got one field that has 2 soil zones. If you use the soil zones that Sergo tells you, that your ASC office, the FSA tells you, why don't the yield maps look exactly like the soil zones? If soil was the thing that drives the variability, and I got a soil science degree, I love soil science. It's really important to understand what the nutrient levels are to make sure we have adequate P, adequate K, we're managing our pH, we try to improve our organic matter, we really love soil health, but soil isn't the only thing. It's really a component between that soil, the way we manage it, and what Mother Nature brings, that's what dictates it. Any other questions before I turn it over? Thank you.